Good evening, and thank you to TED, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this splendid occasion. I can't think of a better invitation than to bring TED to Athens at this time. They have a completely unrivaled reputation for bringing people together to spread good ideas, and I'm very privileged to be here at this time. First, let me say something about me. First thing to know about me is I'm Irish, and I say that not... Thank you. I say that not just because I've been fascinated by how many people have warmly welcomed me to Athens the last 2 days, but they particularly warmly welcomed me when they realized that I'm Irish and not English. So you're particularly warmly welcome. So that's made it so much easier for me over the course of the last couple of days. I grew up in a particular part of Ireland at a particular time, and it's influenced me for the rest of my life. I grew up in the 1970s in Northern Ireland. I grew up in Belfast, and at that time we had a huge civil uprising. We had a thing called the Troubles, where many, many people died, and it lasted for almost 30 years. But as a young boy growing up there, the thing that I remembered most was the importance of our communities, our local communities. Because when everything else was in chaos, our state was in chaos, our business infrastructure was pretty much dismantled, it was those tight bonds of local communities that kept us going. So my journey ever since then, as it developed, I first came to London as an actor in the late 1980s. We put together a play called Now Before the Weather of the War. We thought we were the funniest people in the world, and we arrived in London to an abrupt shock that we weren't. But since then, I've gone on to have a successful career in government initially, then in the corporate world. But over the course of the last 10 years, I've become more and more involved in the creation of ideas, and particularly looking at how social innovation can support public service reform, and how social innovation can create new types of civil society communities. And in a way, when I arrived at this role, as I'll describe over the next 10 minutes, at the Big Society Network, since I didn't actually supposed to get appointed there, I was just growing into it all my life. So what is the Big Society Network? Well, the Big Society Network was set up launched in March this year as an independent organization with the job of looking at how we could deliver on our new Prime Minister's ambition to create a big society. We decided to set up a separate organization. We were particularly interested in how we could harness network technologies, how we could harness the power of our creative media, how we could work with big business and brands to deliver some of his ambitions. And the Big Society, we started these conversations around about a year ago. Groups of young intellectuals, academics, entrepreneurs, technologists started meeting up in bars and restaurants across London about a year ago. And just around Christmas time last year, I think we really began to realize that we were alighting upon and developing a really big, bold, political, imaginative idea. So it was great during the course of the early part of this year when it became clear that the leader of the Conservative Party, David Cameron, had embraced this idea, and more than embraced it, but he decided that this would become the central narrative of his campaign to become the Prime Minister of our country. So it culminated in the publication of the Conservative Party manifesto in April this year, which was entitled An Invitation to Join Government. And a lot of the ideas that we've been working on, we've been developing, we've been extolling, at that moment we realized then that they were being taken seriously. So before I describe what we're actually doing with this idea and how it manifests itself, let me just say a little bit about its origins. The first thing to say is that plainly, if a Prime Minister of the day adopts this as an idea and describes it as a thing that he wants to do, the thing he has to do is deal with the financial crisis, the deficit and the debt, but what he really wants to do is build a big society. The first thing you need to say is that it is a political idea. I think it's important to say I'm not a member of a political party, and this idea, building on civic bonds, rebuilding our civil society, exploring new ways of creating civil associations, is not an idea of necessarily of the left, center-left, or the center-right in politics. Both the intellectual traditions of both parties are actually rooted in self-organized mutuals, cooperatives, and so on. There's no reason in the world why conservative right-wing parties should be associated with the market state, or center-left parties should be associated with the big state. But it wasn't the politics that got me interested in this. It was the generosity of the idea. It was the faith in human nature. It was the optimistic view of human kindness. It was the confidence that we had in our communities and our confidence in our human capability that was driving the group of people who came together last year forward. And not just that, but also as we looked out in the wider world, what became clear is that as we had to deal with the deficit, whatever form that took, as we had to come to terms with the sheer scale of our national debt, as you have in your country, in different circumstances, it became clear to us that maybe this wasn't just a cyclical downturn. This was something bigger and more structural. And particularly as we looked at the inexorable shift of the economies from the west to the east, and the rise of India and China and other Asian countries, it became clear to us that the sort of things that we'd taken for granted in our country since the end of the Second World War, the public services, the welfare services, and so on, that we'd taken for granted and so on, were under serious threat. And it may not be possible for the foreseeable future, during the course of our lifetimes, for the state to maintain those level of services. And particularly when we started looking and grafting the growth, the demographics, the growth of the aging population, the growth of the aging population, the cost of keeping them in care, the cost of health services and pension services and so on, it struck us that we needed a bold new idea for these times. So our sense was that we were coming together with something that was fit for purpose for our times. So then, as we developed the idea, it moved into the Conservative Party manifesto. It then became a real idea. It developed, and during the course of a long and unusual process for the UK, we forged, the outcome of the election was indecisive, and a coalition government for the first time in over 70 years was formed in the UK. And during those negotiations, over the course of 3 days in central London, the Big Society became a key part in brokering a deal between two parties who were historic rivals. They both shared a shared sense that we needed to look at a new way of delivering things, a new way of organising our affairs, a new conversation with citizens about our relationship between the government and the state. So, what at the heart of this was about this idea of civil society. And I've been interested to talk to many of the people here today to find out a little bit how you see civil society in Greece. But our feeling was that there's a great tradition, narrative, and theory about the state and about the markets. People go to business school to learn about the markets and so on. But one of the things that struck us was there's not much of a theory about the civil society. In wider society, civil society, in all its myriad forms, it's in some way the Cinderella part of the whole wider society. We still remain, despite that, having a very robust civil society in the UK, but we also realized it probably wouldn't be enough in itself, and we'd have to look at new ways of creating civil associations, new ways of bringing people together, new ways of connecting people together if we were going to make this big society work. So let me just say a little bit about, at the heart of what some of the things that we're doing, to go to the key of this in terms of policy over the last 6 months. The first thing to say is that we have done something which is remarkable, and that's we've opened up our government in an unprecedented way. We've adopted the practice of transparency, and we've set out millions and millions of data sets so that everybody in our country can see how our government works, how our money is spent, how our governments are organized. We've published organograms of who works in these organizations and what their jobs are and so on. Now, this is something that was promised in opposition by this government and has now been fulfilled. Many people doubted it would happen. Many people who I really respect questioned as recently as 6 months ago whether anyone would actually do it. We have done it on a massive scale. Not only has that been a boon in terms of giving us an insight into how our governments work, but it's also created an incredible opportunity for entrepreneurs to come together to use that data to develop new services that can support local communities, build new businesses, and so on. The second thing, and this is an imperative for us, and I think it may well be an imperative for you here in Greece, was that around decentralisation. In the UK, we have 56,000 square miles. But 80% of all the decisions about how our taxpayers' money is made take place in 1 square mile in one part of London. And we are ardently looking at ways in which we can begin to decentralise services, open up contracts to a range of different organisations, not just let go of power, but push it and force it downwards. One of our ministers has famously described this process as difficult, tough, like he describes it like taking chewing gum off the sole of your shoe. People don't easily give up power. People don't easily relinquish responsibility. But one of the things we're challenged we have to do is begin the process of doing that. The third area is looking at the transfer of state assets. There's a tradition in Britain of doing this in the past. It hasn't happened for some time. But one of the things that's really been dismaying for me as I've been on this journey is meeting people who've tried to take control of state assets. A library is a classic example. Many of our libraries now are struggling to be maintained by municipal authorities. Many of our libraries are struggling. You meet the people who try to take those libraries over into community ownership. And what they have had to go through is incredible. They've had to more or less forget about everything else in their lives for 6-9 months to be able to bring people together, even when the goodwill of the community exists. So one of the things that we're doing through legislation at the moment is making that process much easier, extending it into libraries, to community halls and groups, extending it to post offices and so on, and we're bringing legislation forward to do that. The next area we're looking at is around social finance for social ventures. We have a fantastically vibrant social enterprise community in the UK, and we've decided we want a lot more of it. We want to put a lot more funding our way. We also have a gigantic financial services sector. So what we're doing at the moment is working to use some public money from the UK, from our government funds, to leverage a massive amount of funds to create a big society bank to fund social ventures across the UK over the course of the next few years. We want to be the best place in the world with the biggest resources to support social ventures, business with a serious social purpose. And we're launching that bank in April next year with serious support from the city. We're going to be launching new social finance products, and a whole range of new financial and social services. The final thing, area that I'm leading on at the moment, is how we can bring our great creative community, our technology community, our great businesses and our great brands together to support this. So there's a really concerted action across the country to bring our brightest and best and our most influential in behind this big society idea. And next Thursday, we're bringing 500 of the FTSE 500 CEOs and chairs from across the UK to a meeting with the Prime Minister to begin to explore how we can begin to make these things work. How we can use the billions of pounds that they spend on social responsibility ventures, how they can begin to support local community-based activities. So as I said, one of the things we've discovered with a lot of this stuff is that it's tough. It's tough to get people to relinquish power. It's tough to force that power downwards. But also, the key to the issue is it's not just about forcing power down. Society has to move up. People have to step up to this challenge. It's pointless if governments try to let go of power, fight day in, day out within their organizations and across government to push that power down if people don't step up. And that is the biggest risk to the big society, if people don't step up. And that's where I think I'm excited about some of the potentials of what we're doing. The legislative program that the government put in place is largely based on not imposing stuff, but enabling it to happen. Making it easier to take over your post office, making it easier to set up a school, making it easier to become involved in delivery of local services. But the key for us, I think, is that if we are going to help people get to step up, if we are going to create the new types of civil society that we need to do this job, we have to use technology. We have to look at web innovations, we have to look at smartphone innovations, we have to look at casual, social, multiplayer gaming innovations and so on. We've got to use all those things that are disposable, which are engaging people, where people are collaborating and so on. So a lot of what we're doing at the moment is trying to do that. So it feels to me if you're starting from scratch as a country, technology is not the only answer, but if you're starting from scratch, it can never be less than a fundamental part of that development. And part of what I've been looking at over the last 3 months in this job is thousands and thousands of new ways, new technology platforms and tools that can support this process. And I'm still looking for the killer app for a lot of this activities. A lot of the problems I'm trying to solve, helping neighbors find one another, help them share and so on, just do not exist. The technologies are still not mature enough. But we're working hard with our smartest people to do that. So finally, what I want to say a little bit about this big society is a big idea, and I'll be around for the rest of the evening, so you can find me and talk to me and debate it further. But what I wanted to say really is that, for me, this big society is built in rich and noble traditions. Social traditions, community traditions, traditions of our great civil society. It's fit for our times. It's based on a critique not just of the state, but also of business and the markets itself. It gives us an optimistic take in a time when it can be very easy to be gloomy. And it feels to me that the evolution of network technologies in particular has made this job a lot easier for us to do. Those technologies give us a notion of possibility that would not have existed if we were trying to do this 10 years ago. And as I've traveled around the UK over the course of the last 6 months, the thing that struck me about this is that the big society is a big narrative for a government, as it has to be. But to make sense of the big society, you need to get out into local communities. You need to go out in towns and villages. It's when you see what people can do at the local level, you suddenly just see the potential of this idea. When you see what people can do at a local level, which is much more effective than anything can be done from the center, you suddenly realize that this thing is not a big narrative, but can only be made sense of as a series, as a suite, as a mosaic of little stories. So to make sense of the big society, you need to do that. So one of the things that I want to say really in terms of just closing is that at the heart of this idea, I think is this idea of capability and trusting human capability. And one of the things that I think is essential is one of the essences of TED is actually asking that question: what are we capable of? What is this social energy that we've got? What's this social capital that exists just below the surface all the time? How can we harness that? TED asked that question. In the United Kingdom, we are asking that question of our nation, of our citizens. I think in terms of Greece, starting from scratch, it'd be a good question to ask. What are we capable of? Thank you.